Hello, guys and girls. The program you are about to hear will be both fun and educational, but it is not a substitute for medical advice. Although we are doctors, we are not your doctors. Hello, and welcome to Travel Medicine. As always, I'm your friendly neighborhood internal medicine doc, Dr. J.
Hey guys, Dr. Santhosh here, pediatric infectious disease doc and a researcher.
I had a lot of fun with our cold open last week.
Oh yeah. I don't know if it's a cold open or musical intro. Both are good. Both are good.
Well, nobody knew it was coming. So in that
Yes.
sense, it was a cold open and it was like
Yeah.
Saturday Night Live. Only we're more Saturday night recorded, or actually we're more Friday night recorded and then Saturday morning hastily edited.
I don't think they need that much of a peek behind the curtain. It's just or maybe you do. Let us know on the social medias.
With Acast Plus, you can learn just how frantically we attempt to put this together. Um,
Yeah. But we're happy to do it as long as y'all keep listening. So thank you.
and Santosh, as
Yeah.
I'm sure our regular listening audience can tell from the highly professional tone of this week's intro,
Yeah.
I do believe that it is an alternate week.
It is. For those of you who are not keeping track of the alternate weeks, this is one of the weeks that's not
The regular
the,
one.
the
It's an
regular
alternate
week.
weeks when we say it
Yeah.
is. Yes.
This is the alternate of a week. It's too complicated. we can
but
we can't
alternate
get into it right now.
weeks,
Yeah.
but alternate weeks are when we do everybody's favorite segment,
Get your Kermit
Journal
arms ready.
Club. Journal Club.
Yay!
Yay!
All right.
And I wanted to see if I could keep these musical themes going. So in
Oh yeah.
something that I did not frantically scribble down and will record in more detail later this week,
Yeah.
I figured I'd add a short summary of the upcoming journal club topics in musical
Okay.
form.
Oh
So,
yeah, like a front end kind of synopsis. Absolutely.
yeah, and if I remember, I'll get around to recording the full version later. But ahem, me, you, and sometimes why. Uh, lucky boy, we gonna restore sight to the blind and learn if your smartwatch will tell you when you'll die. And if your blood vessel's gonna get digitized.
Mm.
Dirty boy. You know the doctors are talking on the scene. I hear them whispering about the bacteria you carrying and how you don't know how to keep your damn hands clean.
Oh
Patients
man.
don't know science getting hot at the body shop. Journal Club is unholy, so sit back while we dropping it, knowledge popping it, as we lay it down slowly. Oh. We got Dr. Josh and Santoi Yosh, so you can get that. Patients don't know science getting hot at the Journal Club. So get ready for something unholy with Modern Marvels, a bionic journal club.
And you had to actually teach me that was a newer pop song called "Unholy," or actually based off of that tune. And I had to go listen to that, watch it for the first time. And this is an amazing parody of this song. I like it. I think I like this better than the actual song.
Now you got to go wash your ears out, possibly your eyes.
Yeah, possibly yes.
So let's get into it in no particular order. Let's start with uh, Our first story, a bioengineering breakthrough. We've talked about a lot of these kinds of versions. So, this is an implant that claims it can restore sight to the blind. And this is an eye implant made of collagen protein from pig skin,
Wow.
which, like so many things on the pig, resembles something human. So, this time resembles the human cornea.
Yeah, okay.
And uh, let's dig into whether this can really restore vision to the blind or just the visually impaired.
Right. So we're going to start off with the actual problem because there are so many things that can go wrong with vision. And not all blindness is the same. In this particular instance, we're talking about people who have problems with the very, very front of the eye. So, that clear covering on the very front is called the cornea. It's derived from either the Greek or the Roman. I can't remember what, meaning hard, like corn. So, it's the hard layer at the very, very front that the light passes through before it gets to the lens and then finally in the retina in the back of the eye. So this is going to be addressing problems where that cornea either gets destroyed, gets cloudy, obscured, something like that, where the rest of the visual portion is intact to some degree, so that, as long as light can get through the lens and focus on the retina, you should be able to see something. But that cornea, that first window is obscured.
Now, this is a curable condition, this particular cause of blindness requiring a corneal transplant, and you can get these corneas from cadavers. But the ratio is there's really only about one cornea available for every 70 patients. So
Yeah.
we really still need a better way to address this. Although 1 in 70 is pretty good odds when it comes to transplants.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Compared to kidneys, livers, hearts, it's much easier to get a hold of these. Josh, we're talking about a disease not found much here in the Western world, in the United States, where we're recording from. But one of the scariest diseases that can cause this kind of obscuring, even from birth, is chlamydia trachomatis. And not in the person who contracts the sexually transmitted infection, but when a child is being born, and if a woman has chlamydia, that infection can get on the eye and wear away and destroy the front of the eye until it becomes cloudy and you can't see. Now, taking care of this problem as soon as possible for a little kid is super important, because the longer that the front of the eye is cloudy and you're not getting visual input, the brain itself and the retina is kind of losing training time, on how to see. So yeah, that trachomatis on chlamydia, that's what it's named after, is the trachoma, the obscuring of the eye, that can happen. And this is one of the most common causes of acquired blindness on the planet.
So, a team of scientists at Linkocare Life Sciences and Linköping University, the IKEA of universities, has developed an eye implant that can restore sight. So, they dissolved pig tissue to form a purified collagen solution and then used that solution to make a gel that mimics the cornea and conducted a pilot trial of 20 people who were either blind or close to losing their sight from a condition known as advanced keratoconus. So we're working with more than just infants here.
Yes, yeah. This is a different type of disease that happens later on in adulthood.
So they then took this kind of gel, you can think of it as a medical Play-Doh, and put it put it into the
Yeah.
pocket and then shaped it around the cornea so it could restore the function. Because everyone's eyes are a little bit different. You need to adjust the focusing length because your eye is a lens. So, of the 20 in this study, it was published in the journal Nature Biotechnology. 14 of them, so about 70% who had been completely blind before the implant, were completely cured after the treatment with now 20/20 vision. And
Wow.
legally blind, not legally blonde, legally
Yeah.
blind is, I believe, 2,500.
Yeah, it's around there. Basically, so the top number versus the bottom number, right? So basically we're talking about feet away from a standardized chart. So if you have 20/20 vision, you can see at 20 feet what most people can see at 20 feet. And so if you say like 2,500, that means that you're seeing at 20 feet what most people would be able to make out at 500 feet away. So yeah, somewhere I think between 2,200 and 2,500 is the threshold for legally blind,
Oh
depending
yeah,
on
it's
where you are.
2,200. There you go.
2,200. Okay, there it
2,200
is.
is the threshold for legally blind.
Right. But yeah, 20, all the way at 20 to up to 20, 150, 200. This is correctable. Like if you wear glasses with these, you're good.
So, I mean, correcting to 20/20 vision was actually way better than they were expecting and a bit of a
Oh
surprise.
yeah.
But here's the neat thing about this. With a human cornea transplant, once you get it from a cadaver, it has to be transplanted within 2 weeks. Otherwise, decomposition.
Yeah, yeah. It's a
Uh,
very delicate piece of tissue.
but this bioengineered implant, because it's a collagen solution that's turned into a shapeable gel, can be stored for up to 2 years, and you don't need any stitches. You're not sewing it into the eye, you're just kind of molding it.
Yeah, yeah. So you're more like a sculptor rather than seamster, depending on if you're, male or female persuasion.
Now, again, 20 patients pilot study is when we talk about these studies, we will use a word known as power, which is how powerful is a study? Which is not just the methodology, but if you're looking at something and it works on 20 people, that's great, but there's something like 5 billion people on the planet. How applicable are these results to the rest of humanity? And that's what you want to know, a high power study. So 20 people is not a high power, but it's a good proof of concept. And then it's enough to get you to run larger trials. So that's what this team is looking to do next. They want to do a trial of 100 patients in Europe and the US, and they want to get the implants approved by the FDA. So we're, again, as with most of the studies we talk about this, we are several years out from seeing this in the real world.
Yeah. Again, most of these types of diseases, when we're talking about, I should say corneal disease, chlamydia trachomatis causing disease in very, very small babies, all these kind of things, there is a pretty heavy skew of burden of disease in low to middle income countries, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. So this would really, really be a breakthrough for folks who really need it, who wouldn't normally have access to this type of technology or ability. So I think it's a wonderful thing for global health, really.
So this was done. This pilot study was done on patients from India and Iran with specifically keratoconus.
Right.
And one day we'll get an ophthalmologist. But if you think it's hard to consult them into a hospital, wait about trying to consult them into a podcast.
We're looking at you, Glaucom Flecken.
uh,
Get in here.
But in many parts of the world, keratoconus is it's, well, in all parts of the world, it's a corneal disease caused by thinning of the stroma, or the eye support tissue, weakening and scarring, and it's the leading indication, and it affects men and women in all ethnic groups, with the highest prevalence in China, about 0.9% of their population, uh, India, 2.3% of their population, and Iran, where it's 4% of the rural population.
Yeah. It's one of those heavy burden things where, especially if a person is of what we call productive age, meaning that they're at an age where they can work, contribute to society, etc., you introduce disability and major disability in this case, which can't be accommodated for. And so all of a sudden, a person who really can be working with their society and everything is taken out of that pool, and a lot of the time needs help and dependency. So correcting something like this helps the individual, but it also helps the general group of people um, get better in general, be more productive, advance often in terms of economic growth and health and all these other kinds of things. So, anytime we can address disability, it's really important.
Yeah, and they only needed about 8 weeks of immunosuppression to recover from this compared to what can be, lifetimes of immunosuppression following transplants.
Oh, sure, sure. But so, because this is inert collagen tissue, I'm guessing, so it's not very immunogenic.
Right. So if you're into technology based or biotechnology based papers, this is a very easy, clear one. They go into all the methods of how they created it. They don't focus as much on the actual implantation. They're just like, we made a thing. Here's all the ways we made the thing, and then we put it in people's eyes, and it seemed to work. So hey,
Yeah, it really is a cool engineering paper, including nanotechnology in here. So, some of the beautiful pictures, Josh, that I saw on the source paper are really the electron microscope, looking at the porcine cornea and then their technology, the BPCDX tissue that they were working on. So, it's even if you don't read the whole thing, it's actually beautiful just to take a look at the figures and photographs.
and then moving on to our next story. Oh gosh, look at the time. No, really, look at the time. What kind of watch are you wearing?
I, uh,
Uh,
I, okay, I'll bite Apple Watch. I've got an Apple Watch.
yeah. So, does your Apple Watch track all the things that you're doing? It gives you your heart rate, your steps, your text messages. Dick Tracy.
even if even if I don't want it to. I have some of the health settings turned on, yeah, so that when I start exercising, it starts tracking my heart rate and the duration of the exercise and stuff. And I have turned off a lot of the things that are annoying. Like some of them will actually tell you hey, it's been a few minutes. You should stand up now. Like if you've been sitting for too
You
long.
lazy bum.
I do use also for myself and for others the hand washing thing on there to make sure I'm nice and clean in the hospital. But yeah, it does, especially when I'm exercising. It tracks my heart rate for cardiovascular exercise.
So, one of the things that the Apple Watch provides is an EKG, right? I don't know. I'm not part of the cult of Apple, so
Yeah. It's called a single lead ECG. I have zero idea how it works because Josh, the way you and I were taught when we place the leads across the chest is you need to see the electrical potential across two leads. So I really don't know how this single lead ECG works because there's no other sensors. It's just the watch on your wrist. But yeah, evidently it's starting to get better and better in terms of like the generations of technology.
the next study that we're about to talk about was funded by the Mayo Clinic with no technical or financial support from Apple. So,
Oh,
in that sense, we can trust these results maybe a little bit more than if they were just purely sponsored by a company.
sure. And to be very fair, they were probably just looking for some piece of wearable technology that had this kind of easy, accessible type of data gathering. And Apple was the kind of the easiest and most accessible to market here.
But a study published in Nature Medicine reports the ability of the smartwatch EKG to accurately detect heart failure in non clinical environments. So, before we
Okay.
get into the study, here's why that's important. Normally, to detect heart failure, that is my bread and butter, folks. Like
Yeah.
I see patients, you come in with weight gain, difficulty breathing, inability to lay flat, like all these medical buzzwords and symptoms that we look for. And to confirm that, we'll often get an echo, which is an ultrasound of your heart to see its structure, its function. We'll give you medicines to get fluid off of you. But to make that formal diagnosis, you normally need a cardiologist and a hospital, or at least a
Yeah.
cardiologist in an outpatient clinic. So
Yeah.
the idea that you may be able to accurately detect it with a tiny little device that you wear on your wrist commercially is both highly fascinating and a little disturbing in terms of the data being supplied. Well, no, in terms of the data that you were supplying unknowingly to these companies.
Oh, yes, absolutely. In terms of being able to replace a large, bulky sonographic machine, a technician who actually knows how to put the probes over your chest and read it. Sometimes, Josh, right, with sedation, right, when you have a really obese person, or you have to drop that probe into the esophagus to look at the heart from behind, right, because you can't really see it through all the layers of tissue on the chest. And then a specialist cardiologist who has trained on reading those ultrasounds, the echocardiograms, and then clinical decision making between that type of specialized radiologist, the echocardiographer, and you. And all of the sonographing and everything has to be done in a controlled environment where the person's lying just so and they have landmarks and everything. It is
And
beautiful to,
importantly, we do
yeah.
not tend to sell that data
Yeah. That's the flip side. Yeah.
to then target you better through TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. But
or even scarier, send that data, to any kind of insurance companies, or where insurance companies could look at it and, do something scary like deny you health because they say, oh,
like,
you
have
have
your
a,
Apple Watch tell you, "Hey,
yeah.
you haven't gotten up in 10 minutes, you lazy bum. So we're going to raise your insurance premiums because we can now detect that you're this much more likely to have heart failure." This is Philip K. Dick level dystopia. But let's get into the actual study. So researchers at the Mayo Clinic applied artificial intelligence to Apple Watch EKG recordings to
Mhm.
identify patients with a weak heart pump. So participants in the study, and I'll talk about that in a moment, recorded their smartwatch EKGs remotely whenever they wanted from wherever they were. So that's about as good randomization as you can get. They then uploaded these EKGs to their own electronic health records and as well as securely via a smartphone app developed by Mayo Clinic's Center for Digital Health. Mayo researchers then interpreted the Apple Watch single lead EKGs by modifying an earlier algorithm that had been developed for the traditional 12 lead EKGs that we use to detect a weak heart pump. All the medical students in the room getting excited, like, oh, I know that. That's meaningless to a lot of you not in statistics, but the area under the curve was 0.88. So that's a pretty good measure of accuracy. That's as good or even slightly better than a treadmill test.
Now, accuracy does come along with, all kinds of things, sensitivity and specificity, and that does have to do with the prevalence, like how common this disease is out in the ether, but that's pretty darn good. I mean, this is a start, right? This isn't the ultimate, thing, but to gather this much data and calculate this statistical power, pretty darn good.
It improves early detection, I think. People who are going to have risks and maybe wearing the smartwatch, but does it improve accessibility? I mean, I guess if you can afford an Apple Watch in countries where there isn't a lot of access or in rural areas, sure, but how many people really have access to these smartwatches and how much do we want to feed into them when again at the end of the day it's a commercial device. I'm not
Yeah.
telling you not to do it, I'm just saying it's something we're thinking about. So let's look at the patients involved. About 2,500 people were involved in this study from across 46 states and 11 countries.
Yeah.
They downloaded an app created by the Mayo Clinic, which again was secure and protects your health. This was not sponsored by Apple, so in this case, they're not selling the data.
Right, right. And They got around this a bit by creating, just like you said, their own app so that the data was captured not by Apple's software, but by something else. So they were able to build in the safeguards that they needed for their patients.
And then participants logged over 125,000 previous and new Apple Watch EKGs to their electronic health records between August of 2021 and February of 2022. And clinicians who were cardiologists had access to view all this data on an AI dashboard built into the electronic health record, including day and time it was recorded. Then, of these folks, about 420 of them had an echocardiogram. That's the standard test that we use within 30 days of logging an Apple Watch EKG in the app. And that's within 1 month of when they said, like, hey, we sent an EKG, let's do a quick follow up. Of those 420, 16 of them had a low ejection fraction that was confirmed by the echo to provide a
Okay.
comparison for accuracy. When we're looking at power and statistical significance, you know, 24,000 people participating, 420, so about one sixth of them had a follow up echo, and then 16, so almost one third of the ones who had a follow up echo had a low ejection fraction that was noted, was confirmed. So we're working with some pretty small numbers, but a much larger patient sample. So we can trust the data we're getting a little bit more.
I really, really love this because I think what's kind of being proposed in terms of being able to screen outpatient, so kind of capture those patients who are at risk, and then hey, let's bring them in, and then confirm with a more standard methodology, putting the patients on alert that need to be on alert. This works pretty well as kind of an initial step one. So I do like that.
Yeah, so the way I think I'd prefer to see this used is a patient goes to their primary care doctor's office and they give their history and they find out, they have a certain degree of cardiac risk based on their habits, their family history, things like that. Their primary care doctor tells them, I think you should download this app, log your EKGs, send them out, and then you have a little bit more of an early detection system. Is this something that everyone should make a standard part? I mean, they can't because this was just a small study, but is this something that should become a regular part of everybody? I don't know.
I think maybe you could potentially risk stratify, Josh. So, as a for instance, I know in pediatrics, when we have kids where we bring them in and we see that there's clinical risk here for arrhythmia, for instance, we will go ahead and give them a Holter monitor that they can do at home, and kind of carry with them, or even a handheld monitor for arrhythmia. And they can even like push a little button when they feel palpitations to see if like it matches up with actual heart palpitations. So it's
I love
possible
all of
that.
those. It's linking it to smart devices, commercial smart devices that gives me
Oh,
pause.
got it. Yeah, that does freak me out. Now, I would love it. I don't think this would ever happen, but I would love it if a company such as Apple or something said, "Hey, we see that this is super, super helpful, but we also know that, we don't want this to be commercially available to this kind of thing. So, we'll license the technology or something to where it can be made by a medical device type of company, and you get the sensor and the data you need without all of this connectivity to the internet and social media. But I don't know if anybody would ever have the wherewithal to be like, we're cool with that.
I
Because they
mean, someone
basically.
would. There's people who are gonna like post their colonoscopies to TikTok to a soundtrack. I'm just saying, as as a physician concerned with HIPAA, I
Yes.
don't know that I want corporations involved in this, but I don't see how they won't be. So
Gotcha.
we'll
Fair.
see where things go from here. Moving on to the next story that for some will be very exciting and for others nightmare inducing.
Okay. Absolutely. All right.
A
As if
pill.
this didn't invoke enough nightmares of you know, TikTok tracking your heart.
Well, I guess it depends what your nightmares are about. Mine, as I think we've made abundantly clear on this podcast multiple times,
Yeah.
involve AI. you know, Terminator-based AI and or less medically related but equally terrifying clowns and sea
Yeah.
creatures. But this next story, I was excited about, much less scary to me, but for others who have a different phobia, a little bit more.
Sure.
A pill with a tiny needle in it for painless injections has now passed its first human trial. Who's going to be excited about this? People with diabetes who would like an alternative to injecting themselves daily with insulin, but who still
Yeah.
require those injections. And fear of needles is a huge, huge human fear. About 1 in 10 people have some
Right.
kind of fear of needles. So this pill, called the Rani pill, looks just like a larger version of a normal pill. I think the largest one I can think of is maybe the potassium pills or some of like Lasix. I think is a big pill. I don't know. I hear so many patients tell
Yeah.
me the big one, the blue one, the diamond one, and I'm like, I actually don't know what a lot of them look like. And we've talked about this in other journal clubs too.
Yeah. I think levofloxacin, but I can't quite remember.
Oh yeah,
Um,
fluoroquinolones are pretty big too, I
Yeah,
think.
they're pretty big also. But yeah, just to let people know, it's not Ronnie like Ronny. It's Rani actually like Queen in Hindi, Rani, and that's the name of the company. So they just named it after themselves.
S-
Ronnie pill.
So it looks like a larger version of a normal pill. When you swallow, it passes through the stomach untouched, but the outer covering will dissolve in the less acidic environment of the intestine.
Wow.
Smaller worry about perforations, but when that outer covering dissolves, it triggers a tiny balloon to inflate. And then when that balloon inflates, it pushes a small needle into the muscular wall of the intestine that injects the drug the pill is carrying. So a little bit like a what's the best one? The Jules Verne 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You have like a tiny little submarine hidden under a
Yeah.
protective coating. It passes through and then it gets out and then it inflates, pokes a little needle in and everybody climbs out and explores, only everybody being the drug that we want in the bloodstream.
Incredible Journey or
Oh, there
something
you go.
like
That was
that.
it. Not 20,000 Leagues.
Yeah, yeah, it was that was the one where the scientists they actually shrunk themselves, got into a submarine, shrunk down the whole thing so that they could swim through the the blood vessels and go inside a person to destroy a tumor, I believe. Yeah.
Or I guess depending on what generation you are, we could also say the Magic School Bus
Oh yeah.
or Futurama,
Futurama did one
Parasites
with the
Parasites
worms.
Lost. Yeah, the
Yes.
worm one.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Um, so let's talk a little bit about the study. This was a trial in Australia.
Mhm.
52 people were given Rani pills containing octreotide, which is a drug we use to treat certain cancers, growth disorders, excessive bleeding in GI bleeders, and
Yeah,
and they felt no pain and no discomfort when they swallowed the pill or when it was active, because
okay.
you don't usually have pain sensors in your intestines. You have pressure sensors for distension, but you don't have pain. And the
Yeah, I
pill.
that might freak a lot of people out. So, like, if there was, like, a large pin going through your intestine, you wouldn't really feel it. What you feel when you have discomfort is usually, like, bloating, like the gas, like, blowing up your intestines like a balloon.
And this pill was determined to be as effective at delivering the drug as conventional injections. Uh, Normally, for people who are not in a hospital setting, like I said, usually see this in GI bleeders, but for cancer treatments, growth treatments, it's given as a large injection into the butt once a month. And
Yeah.
patients apparently describe this as uncomfortable.
Well, it's going into like a fatty tissue, right? So, into the subcutaneous. And the same thing is true for, people who have to do subcutaneous injections or intradermal, like insulin, and then, intramuscular injections as well. And that's happening a little bit more commonly, Josh, especially with biologics. So, people, for instance, who have, rheumatoid arthritis or something like that, there are lots of good biologic, so monoclonal antibodies and that kind of thing that you can give, but it's all needles. It's injection somehow.
And a lot of drugs, and again, I'm bringing up diabetics because that's usually the most commonly known injectable drug. And drugs like that are just not viable in the stomach. They're destroyed in the gut if they're swallowed, so that's why you have to inject them directly. But people who hate needles, which remember is about 1 in 10 of the population,
Sure.
often will delay or skip injections and end up developing complications as a result. So, having an oral version of insulin, and I mean insulin, not a metformin, not a glipizide, specifically insulin, would really improve blood sugar control. But the full results of this trial haven't been published yet. So they need extensive trials in people with diabetes. This was done with octreotide, a vastly different drug intended for vastly different purposes. But the delivery method seems to work. And that's the real takeaway that's exciting here.
The fact that, you could get that medication in, minimal pain, minimal discomfort, it was just like swallowing a pill, but it was given, into the bloodstream. That's so awesome.
Let's move on to our next study,
All right.
which is equally futuristic sounding. Researchers in China and Switzerland have developed electronic blood vessels that can
Ooh.
be actively tuned to address subtle changes in the body after implantation. Imagine a Nest system, but in your blood. Blood
Okay,
pressure
okay.
too high? Let's program it to tighten or widen the vessels.
Yeah. So this is the issue with any kind of grafted or artificial blood vessels, right? The miracle, the beauty of native blood vessels is they're not these static tubes that you think of, like internal plumbing, just like a straight copper tube, right? They have multiple layers to them that sense blood flow, pressure, heat, all these kind of a thing. And they can actually, dilate and contract in order to supply blood or, slow down the flow of blood to certain body parts and tissues depending on what's needed by our body. And these are all hormonal cues and nervous system cues and all these kind of things like this. And it works together in this, constant intricate dance. It's happening to you guys right now as you're listening to this podcast. So replacing this, if you have to put in a blood vessel with a static tube, is just not as useful as, if you have something that's responsive.
So let's get into the study. Now, first, let's play one of our favorite games when it comes to research science. Was this done in, of the available research animals, pig, chimp, or rabbit? Da 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 da
uh,
da 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 da.
Everybody locked in your answer? Locked in?
Okay, so Santosh, was this research study carried out in pigs, chimps, or rabbits?
Rabbit.
Nice. Keep
Yeah.
track, folks. Later on this year, we're gonna do a journal club dedicated to just that game show.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like pig, chimp, or rabbit will be at least 5 to 10 times more popular than Wheel of Fortune. That's a conservative.
So tell me about these blood vessels. Um, I know that they're made from metal polymer roll-ups.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. For anybody who's interested, poly L lactide co Ada caprolactone. I think that's right. It might be epsilon. So essentially, you've got a polymer, a plastic type polymer, and then that encapsulates liquid metal. Okay. And so now you've got a flexible and actually biodegradable electric it's circuit. It's like a little circuit in the form of a tube. And the cool thing about this, Josh, is it's inert, so it's not going to provoke an immune or inflammatory response, or at least it shouldn't. And it does have the potential to be endothelialized. So when you have to put a stent, for instance, into a coronary artery to open it up after a heart attack or maybe before. What happens is there is a process where your own cells grow to cover that stent. So it becomes covered in endothelium. Likewise, this particular tube can undergo endothelialization so that the body just recognizes the inside of it as a part of your blood vessel. And then, yeah, you can hook it up to electrical signals. You can, stimulate it so you can actually improve endothelialization. You can, open up tiny little holes in it called electroporation. So if you want to, you can actually like send in, gene delivery or anything like that. And so, yeah, it is a fully prosthetic
You can
blood
also
vessel.
make cell membranes more permeable so it allows better drug delivery throughout the
Yes.
vessels once you've opened them up.
Yeah. So this is something, you hurt your shoulder bad enough or your hip, you get a metal hip replacement, right? This is something we haven't been able to do before is have a artificial replacement when you have vascular damage like a blood vessel. So this would be so good if it worked.
They also managed to do it with arteries, which are much, much harder to repair than veins because they're under much higher pressure and therefore have to be more rigid compared to veins, which are a little bit more elastic.
Yeah.
So, a 3-month trial in rabbits showed that the artificial arteries functioned just as well as narrow ones, with no inflammatory response and no narrowing or in-stent restenosis,
Yeah.
meaning it
No
stayed
blocks.
open. It
Yeah.
stayed open once they put it in.
Which is
Um,
good because they use the carotids, so the vessels that actually feed the brain of these poor little bunnies. So, yeah, keeping blood flow happy to the brain is a good thing.
yeah, so very, very exciting. Again, we're still only at the rabbit stage, um,
Mhm.
and we'll
It's
have to
it's still
see.
it's still wabbit season.
Yes,
Yeah.
we haven't made it to duck season yet.
Nor I think we ever will. I don't know of any studies using ducks as human analogs.
Be pretty
um,
foul.
yeah. But yeah, Josh, they went all the way through implantation. They used that electroporation, sending an electrical signal to actually make those small holes so that they could deliver drugs through them. And then they explanted these vessels as well at the end so that they could examine them. And they had been endothelialized and everything, by the native carotid that was around it. So yeah, it did everything that it was supposed to do during the time that it was implanted.
Now, to close out our final story and linking a little bit back to our musical open, at least in theme, if
Yeah,
not content.
sure.
In a surprise study I didn't tell you about in the outline, Santosh,
Okay.
scientists have invented the first, not what you think, vagina
Yeah.
on a chip. Go ahead and let that simmer for a moment.
Yeah, just there's going to be there are at least 5 different visuals that would show up in people's minds when they hear vagina on a chip, and their brain
It's a
has to
nice
kind of
fun
process.
prompt. It's a fun prompt
Yes.
for those new AI artist programs.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all the dollies and everything. If you just inputted the words vagina on a chip, and see what came out.
Please don't. We didn't
Um,
tell you to do that.
no, not even a little. Nah, no, no.
but
It's just
but if you did it anyway and Pringles are
yes.
involved, let us know.
Yeah, more than likely it won't work because a lot of the folks who program these things come from Western countries, and a lot of places there are quite uptight about human biology, especially when it comes to sexual biology and reproduction. So they might just like censor your result, which is kind of stupid.
But
But
let's
yeah,
talk about what this actually is.
yeah,
Now that we've had our fun attempting to picture it. Um,
yeah.
it's a small device that contains live human cells and replicates the cellular environment found inside the vaginal canal.
There you go. So this is one of the latest of lots of different organs on a chip. Okay. So I can't experiment on just cells in a dish because that doesn't show you what's happening like in real life. I don't want to explant something. I don't want to do animal research and harm the animals. So what do? You form the microenvironment of whatever organ you're doing on a little silicone, or in this case, a plastic chip that can be held in your fingers. And Josh, we have livers on a chip, we've got stomachs on a chip, I think we've got kidneys on a chip.
How is Lay's not involved in this yet?
Yeah, but it's so cool. Not only do you have the cells that you need, but they're in the proper architecture and orientation. And they have microfluidics in there. So you can run, blood or plasma across it to simulate that it is in like a microenvironment as if it was part of the larger organ. So it's a much better simulation than just like a petri dish full of like vaginal epithelial cells, for instance.
So, in this latest Lego for scientists, by
Yeah.
adding bacteria to the device, aptly
Mhm.
named the vagina chip,
Yep.
researchers can study how different microbes affect the health of the vagina. And this was published in the journal Microbiome.
Mhm.
They can also test how different drugs and probiotics change the composition of the microbiome and how that could make you predisposed or protected to certain kinds of infections.
And I think this is even cooler if tech like this keeps advancing, where you can very quickly manufacture a given organ on a chip. You can actually take, for instance, a scraping of cells, and I don't mean like horrible bloody scraping, just a nice, brushing of cells from an individual, actually, and grow them on this chip, and then subject it to microbiomes in this case, and say, okay, well, in general, we know that these particular bacteria are healthy, for what we know about vaginal health and human beings at large. But for this person or this individual specifically, you could test it out and say, oh, this is like the optimal combination of, microbiome, et cetera, et cetera. So this could even become like personal health, which would be super cool.
Well, talk about personal. The device measures only 1 inch long, 2.5
Hmm.
centimeters, and
Okay.
contains donated cells from two women
Yeah.
collected from the lining as well as the connective tissue that runs beneath the lining. And this sits on either side of a permeable membrane, which replicates the 3D structure of the vaginal wall. They then allow these cells to multiply for 5 days in the device before adding estradiol, and that
Hmm.
changes which genes are switched on and triggered the production of mucus as you would see in an in vivo, in a live setting.
Right, exactly. So now you have a miniature 3D representation of the vaginal environment. If you needed to test anything on it, bacteria, drugs, whatever it is, you have a much more accurate and real life representation of what would happen to the person, as opposed to if these were floating in solution or lying on a single plate.
And they did. They tested with good and bad bacteria. So, first, they ran tests with a bacteria commonly found in that environment, the
Hmm.
lactobacillus.
Okay.
And, once they did that, they found that the lactobacillus produced lactic acid, making
Mhm.
the tissue on the chip acidic, very
Yep.
similar to the real environment, a pH of about 4.5 or less, which
Yep.
prevents the growth of harmful bacteria. So they said, okay, we managed to get the acidity down to where we would expect it to be in this microenvironment. They then did a experiment with bad bacteria, in this case bacterial vaginosis, one of the more
Hmm.
common infections caused by overgrowth.
Yeah.
And when these were introduced onto the chip, it caused the pH or the acidity of the device to rise along with the number of inflammatory cells that you would expect to see in an infected tissue.
Oh, so you're actually watching an active inflammatory response, right? And we think of inflammatory cells, like our white cells that are going around our, blood and all that kind of thing. But in fact, all of us have tissue resident inflammatory cells that can act very, very quickly to fight any type of break, injury, infection right there, kind of as it happens. So they became activated. They got flipped on and they said, "Hey, we gotta fight. We gotta protect our home."
So there's still a lot of work. There are things that you cannot study in chip form, but
Yeah,
in
that's
terms
true.
of microenvironments, this is a really good start, and it's another organ that we can add to our collection.
Yeah, that's true. The system has to be validated well to show that, okay, it's as close to real as we can possibly get, and that it does faithfully mimic that type of environment. And likewise, this particular one was made from two different donors, so it doesn't represent all different types of women. But if this model works out really well, it can be replicated, and just the same way you can run disease models on livers and kidneys and hearts on a chip. Now we can do it for vaginal health, which is awesome.
I want to see the Saturday Night Live advertisement for this product.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
that's it
yeah.
for this week. As always, we love to hear your comments, questions, and feedback. If you'd like to support us spiritually, emotionally, or financially, links to do that are in the show notes, along with links for further reading on some of the studies mentioned here. The show is produced by me with a lot of help from Dr. Santosh and friends. Our theme music is composed by Rachel Leisure. If you have things you'd like us to cover, by all means, contact us. If you want to enjoy some more full length versions of these musical parodies or conversations that go nowhere, subscribe to us on ACAST Plus. Like and subscribe. And until next time, as always, keep a song in your heart, soap on your hands, and a shot in your arm. Find a country that's open when you've done all those things. And after that, happy travels.
Bye, everybody.